Welcome back to Murder on Record, where every case is etched in blood and the truth is buried in the fine print. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we dig through the dusty files, the overlooked evidence, and the whispered testimonies to bring long-forgotten crimes back into the light. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a case that, well, it really captured everyone's attention back then, the 2008 murder of Travis Alexander and the conviction of his ex-girlfriend, Jodi Arias.
Yeah, it's a story filled with just intense emotion, betrayal, and really shocking violence. It's one of those cases that still fascinates people.
It really does. And you had these sort of contrasting figures at the center.
Exactly. Travis Alexander, presented as this charismatic, successful guy, a motivational speaker, devout Mormon.
Right.
And then Jodi Arias, his ex, a photographer. And her behavior, well, it was often described as erratic, certainly later on.
That contrast, I think, is part of why it drew so much attention.
Definitely. The public images were just so different.
So our goal here is to really unpack the key elements of this case, look at the evidence, the timeline, and maybe touch on some questions that honestly still feel a bit unresolved.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The beginning of the relationship.
Yeah, let's do that. How did they actually meet?
It was back in 2006, a work conference, I think, in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And by all accounts, the connection was like instant, very passionate.
But volatile too, right? That seems to be a theme.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sources point to this really intense push and pull dynamic almost from the start. Passionate, yes, but also unstable.
And they broke up, officially anyway, in 2007.
Correct. But the involvement didn't just stop there. They continued a sexual relationship.
And didn't she move to Arizona for a bit, like she was cleaning his house?
Yes, she did. Moved there, took care of his place for a while, and then eventually went back to California. It suggests, a connection that was really difficult for them to completely break.
Okay, so things are already complicated, and then it starts to get darker. There's this incident in May 2008.
Right. The gun. A .25 caliber handgun was reported stolen from Jodi Arias' grandparents' home.
Now, was that gun ever directly linked to the murder weapon?
No, not definitively.
Right.
But I mean, the timing and the caliber,
Yeah.
it certainly hangs there as a significant detail, especially considering what happened next.
Which brings us to early June 2008, specifically June 4th.
Yes. Jodi drives to Mesa, Arizona, visits Travis at his home.
And they spent time together that day.
They did. Sources say they had a sexual encounter, and they took photographs, intimate photographs.
And those photos, they become incredibly important later on, don't they?
Hugely important, especially for establishing the timeline of events on that specific day. They ended up contradicting quite a bit of what was said later.
So just days after that visit on June 9th, that's when the discovery happens.
Yeah. Travis's friends became concerned when they couldn't reach him. They went to his house.
And found him.
They found him in a shower. His body was already decomposing. Just a horrific scene.
Awful. And obviously that kicks off a major investigation immediately. What was Jodi's initial reaction or story?
Well, initially, she denied any involvement whatsoever. She even went on Inside Edition.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, and she claimed that intruders had broken in and killed Travis.
Intruders. Okay, that's a very different story from where things ended up.
Completely different. That initial denial, that intruder story, it's key to keep that in mind as things unfolded.
So she maintains this intruder story for a while.
For a time, yes. But then in July 2008, she's arrested in California.
And extradited, sent back to Arizona.
Exactly. Extradited to Arizona to face charges. And then it took until 2010, but her story shifted dramatically.
That's when the self-defense claim emerged.
That's right. The intruder narrative was dropped, and suddenly it was self-defense, a massive shift.
Wow. Okay, so that really sets the stage for the trial in 2013, which was, it became a huge media spectacle.
Oh, enormous. Constant coverage. And the testimony was graphic. The photos were explicit. It was intense.
Let's talk about the evidence presented at that trial. What did the crime scene itself show?
Well, the violence was extreme. Travis had multiple defensive wounds on his hands and arms.
Suggesting he fought back.
Yes. His throat was slit, almost from ear to ear, and he'd also been shot.
Shot and stabbed.
Shot and stabbed, yes. A gunshot wound to the head. Plus, there was significant blood evidence at the scene, which forensic teams analyzed extensively.
And then there was the camera, Travis's camera.
Ah, yes, the camera. That was probably the single most crucial piece of digital evidence.
Because of the photos found on it.
Exactly. They managed to recover deleted photos. And these photos were time-stamped. They showed Jodi Arias
At the scene.
In the shower with Travis, moments, literally moments, before the estimated time of the murder.
So that completely destroys her initial alibi, the intruder story.
Absolutely. It placed her right there, right before he died. A real turning point in the investigation and the trial.
What about other evidence? I remember something about a rental car.
Yes, the car she rented for the drive. When she returned it, investigators noted the floor mats were missing,
Missing. Okay.
and there were some small reddish stains found inside the car. They tried to test them, but the forensic analysis was ultimately inconclusive, couldn't definitively link them to Travis or blood.
So it was circumstantial, but still suspicious.
Kind of another piece that raised eyebrows, yeah. Missing mats, odd stains, it added to the picture, even if it wasn't conclusive proof itself.
And then Jodi Arias actually testified, right, for a long time.
Oh, yes. An extraordinary amount of time. She was on the stand for 18 days.
18 days.
Unprecedented, really. And her testimony was just full of contradictions, shifting narratives, fake alibis early on, the intruder story, then the self-defense claim. It was a lot.
So weighing all that, the photos seem like the strongest piece tying her directly.
I'd say so. The timestamp photos were incredibly powerful. Hard to argue with photographic evidence placing you there right before the murder.
Plus DNA and fingerprints.
Yes, there was DNA evidence and fingerprint evidence linking her to the scene and reportedly to the weapon as well, although the gun itself wasn't recovered initially.
Okay, so the prosecution's case seems pretty strong based on that physical and digital evidence. What was their proposed motive?
Their argument was essentially jealousy. They portrayed Arias as obsessed, unable to accept that Travis wanted to end the relationship definitively and move on, possibly with other women.
So a crime of passion fueled by rejection,
That was the prosecution's narrative, yes. But the defense, of course, had a completely different take.
which was a self-defense argument based on abuse.
Correct. The defense argued that Jodi had endured years of emotional, sexual, and sometimes physical abuse from Travis. They claimed she feared for her life on that day and acted in self-defense during a confrontation.
So two vastly different interpretations of the relationship and the events of that day.
Absolutely. Polar opposites.
Which brings us back to some of those lingering questions or unresolved bits, like the gun.
Right. The .25 caliber handgun used in the murder. It was the same caliber as the one stolen from her grandparents.
But never definitively proven to be the same gun.
Exactly. No direct forensic link was ever established between the stolen gun and the murder weapon.
Yeah.
Partly because the murder weapon itself wasn't found at the scene immediately. It adds a layer of, well, slight ambiguity.
And the rental car evidence, as you said, was circumstantial.
The stains weren't conclusive. The missing mats could theoretically have other explanations, though it looks suspicious in context. It wasn't a smoking gun like the camera photos.
And then there's the self-defense claim itself. The jury obviously rejected it.
They did. They convicted her of first-degree murder.
But the claims of abuse, does that leave open questions about the true nature of their relationship, even if it wasn't legal self-defense?
I think it does for many people. The trial brought out very disturbing details about their interactions from both sides. Even rejecting the legal claim of self-defense doesn't necessarily answer every question about the toxicity or dynamics that existed between them behind closed doors. It remains, a complex and disturbing picture.
It's interesting, too, thinking about the timing of this case. It kind of blew up right as true crime was becoming a huge phenomenon in pop culture.
Absolutely. The rise of true crime podcasts, documentaries, online forums. This case landed right in the middle of that boom. The trial was televised, dissected online.
And it became incredibly sensationalized, didn't it? There were viral moments, intense public scrutiny.
Definitely. It tapped into that public fascination with crime, relationships gone wrong, and the darker side of human behavior.
And it also touched on really complex issues around domestic violence claims.
It did. Arias' attempt to portray herself as a victim of abuse was met with a lot of skepticism, largely because her story had changed so many times.
Right. The inconsistencies really damaged her credibility on that front for many observers, including the jury.
It highlights the challenge. When someone does claim abuse, but their narrative is inconsistent or contradicted by other evidence, it becomes very difficult to parse.
So after the conviction, there was the sentencing phase. And that wasn't straightforward either.
No, it wasn't. The first jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision on whether to impose the death penalty.
So another trial for sentencing.
A second penalty phase trial with a new jury. And again, that jury deadlocked on the death penalty question.
Wow. So twice they couldn't agree on death. What happened then?
Because two separate juries deadlocked, the death penalty was off the table. The judge then had the final say. In 2015, Jodi Arias was sentenced to life in prison,
Without the possibility of parole.
without the possibility of parole. Natural life.
So she'll spend the rest of her life incarcerated.
That's the sentence.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it leaves you thinking. A life sentence. Considering the brutality, the evidence, but also those lingering questions about the relationship, the motive nuances. Did that sentence feel like justice for Travis Alexander, for his family?
It's a really tough question, isn't it? Justice means different things to different people. For some, life without parole is the appropriate consequence. For others, maybe the unanswered questions or the lack of the death penalty leaves it feeling incomplete. There's no easy answer.
It certainly makes you, the listener, reflect on what justice looks like in these incredibly messy, tragic cases where the full truth might always remain somewhat elusive.
Yeah. What does accountability truly encompass when the narrative is so contested and the damage so profound?
A lot to think about there. Until next time, stay curious and keep your eyes on the evidence.